Welcome to the Spokesman Speaks, a podcast for farmers and ag professionals by the Iowa Farm Bureau, bringing you the news, experts, and educational insights that matter most. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to our March 13th edition of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. I'm Andrew Wheeler, and this week's episode features conversations with Iowa Secretary of Agriculture Mike Naig and environmental scientist Shawn Richmond. We'll start with Secretary Naig for an update on a program that we've covered on this podcast before. The Choose Iowa program is all about supporting Iowa farmers and agriculturalists by giving consumers more opportunities to choose Iowa-grown and processed products. Just last week, Secretary Naig and the Iowa Department of Ag hosted a crowd at Jasper Winery in Des Moines to announce the 28 farmers, small businesses, and nonprofits that just received Choose Iowa cost share grants to diversify their ag product offerings, expand markets, and shorten supply chains. Spokesman reporter Bob Bion was at the event to discuss Choose Iowa with Secretary Naig.
Secretary Naig, thanks for being with us today. Can you give us a little refresher on the Choose Iowa Grant Program, what it is and the objective of the program?
You bet. And so, here we are today. We just announced the second round of Choose Iowa grants, 28 recipients. We wanted to bring back the Choose Iowa brand. And so that's an Iowa marketing brand for Iowa-made, Iowa-grown, Iowa-raised products. Well, as part of that, we knew that we also thought it made sense to bring some grant dollars, some resources to help some of these farmers or processors or anybody in that supply chain in their ability to expand or diversify their offerings. And so launched the Choose Iowa grant program. And really, we've kept it quite broad. When I first was thinking about it, I really thought of it as it's just a value-added ag grant program. It's just about how do we take something that we grow here in Iowa and capture more margin, capture more value, process it here. And that was really the impetus for it. I'm excited by where it's gone because, today we launched grants for cidery, vegetable and fruit processing, on-farm dairy processing, meat, a variety of things. And that's really fun to see is the creativity that's coming from Iowans around this whole effort.
Well, let's talk a little bit about today. Awarding 28 Choose Iowa grants for Iowa farmers, small businesses, and nonprofits. What will this mean for Iowa?
Yeah, you bet. Well, okay, so 28 grants. The grant funding was $463,000, but I stressed that this is just cost share. We only go up to $25,000. Some of these projects are significant. You're talking over $1.4 million in total investment. That's not a small number. There are some significant investments being made here, and we're just one piece of it. The whole point of this, again, has been around diversifying the types of products that are available to Iowa consumers that come from Iowa. And I also think a lot about the add-on benefits. I have met a number of folks that have been involved or interested in Choose Iowa and been involved in the grant program that are beginning farmers or younger farmers. Not all beginning farmers are young farmers either, by the way, but beginning farmers. But also, in fact, today you got an example of a couple of these entities that are bringing the next generation into their operation. And it's for that next generation that they're doing these things. And so to me, that's one of those really important add-ons here is that I think we are going to continue to create pathways for new and young and beginning farmers to get involved. And that's so important because, it's never been easy to get into agriculture, but it's certainly not easy today. And these very well could be some pathways that open up that we haven't thought of before. So more Iowa-grown products available to more consumers, capturing more value in Iowa communities and creating more opportunities for everybody in that supply chain. So grants are about more, apparently.
So what was the goal in selecting these 28 this go-around? Looks like a variety of operations from a winery to a creamery.
Yeah, the important thing to note about that is we, again, had something like $3.3 million worth of grant applications in the last 2 years. So that tells you that we've got really a lot of interest in this, but I would tell you that we awarded 28 grants, but there were some good projects that didn't get funded because we just don't have that much funding. So these are competitive. There's a scoring process. We are looking for some diversity, and both geographic diversity. We want these projects to truly stretch from border to border in the state of Iowa, but at the end of the day, this is scored on impact. Can we make more Iowa products more available? And you've got to score, and it's a competitive process. So that's something that we believe in. If the legislature is going to award us dollars, we have a responsibility to ensure that there's a significant return on that investment. On that point, I'm really excited. Over time, we'll be able to track this. One, track the investment that these applicants are making themselves. This is cost share. But two, we will be able to also then assess the economic return. What's the return on this investment when an operation expands, or when Picket Fence Dairy expands their cheese production? Well, you can go out and you can calculate an economic return to that. I'm looking forward to, and we're committed to showing that, especially to the legislature, who has been so supportive of this effort.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about the money. So where does the available money come from, and how much is available?
Yeah, so this is both the Choose Iowa marketing program, which will be launched later this year. That's a line item coming from the legislature. And then to the Choose Iowa grants, which started, by the way, $250,000 last year. We were able to show so much interest and so much value that in the second year, the legislature increased that funding to $463,000. And so we have had great support, House and Senate, our Agriculture Committee chairs, our budget sub chairs. Really, leadership has been incredibly supportive. Governor, everybody's excited to see what can happen here. So this is funded by the legislature, but it was an initiative that we carried now 3 years ago to get this started, and I'm excited to see it really, it's just taking off.
Is there money available for the future yet?
Yeah, so we're going to have to go and request these dollars every year, but I'm very confident and I'm comfortable that when you can show, one, that there's so much demand, and again, we've got applications that far exceed the dollars we have available, and we also then can show that we're funding only the quality projects, and in fact having some that don't get funded, and the return, and that's the key. If this program can't show a return on investment, then we shouldn't be doing it. And the good news is I think we're already seeing it yield tremendous results. So it is something that'll be an active request every year before the legislature, and we're going to make sure we continue to advocate for it, but we have a lot of great support in the legislature.
Has that request been made this year?
It has. It's, again, things are looking very good, and we expect it to be funded next year. It's an ongoing effort. When we asked to create the Choose Iowa program and to hire experienced staff, what I asked for was, don't make me shoestring this. Don't give me a program, but then nobody to run it. And so we were really clear about that from the beginning, that if you're going to have a marketing program, then you ought to have a marketing expert, and we've been able to do that. Beth Romer, we were able to hire her back from North Carolina, where she'd been working on their state branded program. And so again, we kind of laid that out at the beginning. Legislature was very receptive to it.
If somebody is interested in applying in the future, what should they do? Where should they go to get more information?
Yeah, so the best source of information is going to be the Iowa Department of Ag website, iowaagriculture.gov. But again, as we get into this year, we are filing rules and we are creating program standards. You will be hearing more about Choose Iowa and Choose Iowa in terms of the marketing. I think you're going to start seeing Choose Iowa in a grocery store promoting Iowa-grown products. You're going to see Choose Iowa on menus at restaurants, farmers markets. We aspire to have this be a very well-known brand, and with that will then come these grant opportunities. So best place to find more information about what's been announced today, but also future grant opportunities, which really we're just going to do on an annual basis at this point. So it'll be next fall before we have grant dollars available, but iowaagriculture.gov is the best place to find information.
Yeah, so let's end with the Choose Iowa brand.
Yeah.
There's a Choose Iowa survey available on your website.
Yes.
Looks like you're seeking some input. Can you tell us a little bit more about the survey and building a foundation for the Choose Iowa branded marketing program?
Absolutely. So first thing you should do is ask your stakeholders what they think, and we've been getting that feedback really throughout. So we're confident that we're headed in the right direction. I simply ask every time I'm with a group of grocers or restaurants or producers, I say, do we have something here? Is this worth pursuing? And the answer is always yes. Now, how do you run a program? What are the details? How do you define which products are in and which ones are out? And that's the nuts and bolts of running a branded marketing program. And so there's a lot of work to do here. I'm confident that we've got the right team in place, but that starts with, I'm glad you mentioned the survey. We want to hear from people. We want to hear from producers, processors, folks that are selling meat direct, doing on-farm dairy processing. Tell us what you'd like to see, what would be helpful, what we shouldn't do. Just as important, I think, sometimes is what you should do is what you shouldn't do. And we want to launch a solid program that really hits the target here. And I would say this too, this program is going to grow over time. We're going to start by doing some things that make all kinds of sense and maybe save some of the tricky things for a little bit later as we get into it. But I just think there's so much opportunity here. Consumers want this. They're saying they want to choose local. We've got producers that are looking for more market opportunities. Oh man, if you can bring those two things together, boy, you've got magic. And so we're really excited about what this can mean.
It's not hard to support a program that's aimed at giving farmers more marketing opportunities and narrowing the gap between farmers and consumers. I'm guessing that those of you listening to this podcast can get behind a program just like this one. And you probably have some of your own ideas to help the program move along. If that's the case, be sure to fill out the survey that Secretary Naig referred to. We've linked that survey and some information about this year's Choose Iowa Cost Share grant recipients in the notes for this podcast episode. So click there after you're done listening here. Next up is Shawn Richmond. Shawn is Iowa Farm Bureau's Conservation and Natural Resources Policy Advisor. He's also an environmental scientist with more than 25 years of experience across academia, government, and the private sector. That makes him the perfect person to ask about Iowa's conservation and water quality progress. Farm Bureau's Zach Bader has the story.
So Shawn, let's just get right to it. We have some critics out there that say that not enough is being done when it comes to conservation and water quality. What are some of the clearest signs that you're seeing out there for those folks that we have seen progress in recent years?
You know, I think a lot of it starts with the unprecedented funds and technical assistance and continued research that the state has invested in to make sure that the best practices available are being made available to our farmers across the state. Ever since enactment of Senate File 512 in 2018, we've seen unprecedented levels of new resources and financial assistance available to help increase the pace and scale of adoption of numerous practices across the state. We've also seen, thanks to that, growth in several other conservation practices. Cover crops is probably one of the most notable increases we've seen over the past several years, going back as far as around 2009, when we'd estimate we had around 10,000 acres in the state, to more recently, where we had nearly 3 million acres of cover crops planted just last year. We've also seen a lot of growth in the amount of research that's being done at Iowa State University in particular, continuing to get better information on what practices work best and where, continuing to look into developing new practices. That's really given us a lot of great information and resources to make sure that our farmers have the best science driving their actions. There's also been other signs, even in the water quality monitoring data that's done across the state by the United States Geological Service. Recent trends going back to 2014 through 2021 show that both the Raccoon and Des Moines rivers have had significant decreases in their trend lines for their water quality on nitrate. For the Raccoon River, there's been a 77% decrease in that nitrate concentration, and for the Des Moines, an 83% decrease.
Shawn, I think it's only natural that as we talk about this progress to maybe compare ourselves to what some other states are doing. So how do Iowa farmers stack up nationally when it comes to implementing practices that are used to protect our soil and water?
Yeah, so Iowa farmers have really done an excellent job of adopting numerous practices across the state. And thanks to the hard work they've done over the several years that they've been working at adopting these practices, they've earned themselves recognition as being number one in several practices. Some of those include buffers, grassed waterways, filter strips, water quality wetlands, pollinator habitat, and bioreactors. And beyond that, in general, with continuous CRP, Iowa leads the nation not only in just the amount of acreage that's enrolled there, but also is the only state in the U.S. to have over 1 million acres of continuous CRP enrollment.
So all those practices, in addition to the fact that we lead the nation in corn, we're number 2 in soybeans, we lead in ethanol and biodiesel, we're leading in production also in a lot of conservation practices as well.
Yeah, so really when you think about it, those two go hand in hand. Being good stewards of our land that enable the agricultural bounty they produce goes hand in hand with conservation to help preserve and protect the soil and the water that helps us achieve those goals.
So I know that you've told me before that farmers are using some conservation practices in their fields and along the edges of their fields that didn't even exist a decade ago. So how about you tell us about some of those innovative practices, and from your perspective, what does that say about farmers' commitment to continually improving upon their water quality protection efforts?
Yeah, so particularly when it comes to nitrate and practices that help reduce nitrate losses from our farm fields, there have been great developments over the past decades that have allowed new technologies, new research to be put into place and into practice in farm fields across the state. Notably, a few of those are water quality wetlands, also bioreactors, and saturated buffers. These are practices that there was numerous years and decades of research that went into the development of here in Iowa, developed for Iowa landscapes in order to maximize the benefit they could have. Water quality wetlands help reduce nitrate concentrations and what's leaving our farm fields by over 50%. Bioreactors and saturated buffers have similar high percentage reductions that they afford as well. So really this shows where there's been a focus to the issues at hand. The research has been applied to find those workable solutions that we can employ across Iowa and farm fields and have those large impacts and find those practices that have a lot of bang for the buck and provide a big reduction in our nitrate losses. I hear from farmers as well about other things they're doing that aren't necessarily practices that have been identified by the science or quantified as to what impact they have, and trying new ways to take existing practices and approaches and apply them in novel ways to their farm fields. So they're continuing to experiment with what works best in their farms, and that helps to influence the research as well. So it's really a continuous cycle where we have research that's put into place, outreach with farmers to show them what can work best and where, and they're also, on the farmers' side, continuing to invest in looking at ways that they can find things that work well on their farms and help to inform the research process as well.
Probably also speaks to the fact that we don't want to take the science from any one particular period in time in the past and say, nope, that is the science and that's what we've got to apply, that's what we've got to mandate across the state. So in addition to the evolving technology, we also have, Iowa has different kinds of landscapes, different kind of soil. So I think it kind of speaks to that larger point as well, just the innovation in those practices.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, not every practice is going to work on every farm, every field, every place in the state. So we do have to have tailored solutions, finding the practices that work well in certain landscapes. Even north to south in Iowa, we have considerable differences in the climate, so we want to find practices that work well in our northern part of the state and with tile drain lands versus areas of the state that are more rolling to steeply sloping lands that have different practices that are going to hit the resource concerns that are particular to that area. So really, when we look at things, when we hear about one-size-fits-all type approaches, those aren't the type of things that we want to look into. We want to find things that are tailored solutions that provide the flexibility to meet the concerns at hand across all farm fields in the state.
Shawn, we know that collaboration has been another really important factor in Iowa's progress. We see partners, whether that's rural and urban or private sector and public sector, working together to advance water quality protection. So how many of those partnerships exist out there, if you have a number? And do you have an example or two that would illustrate the impact of that collaboration?
Looking back from past to present, there have literally been dozens upon dozens of watershed and various local partnership projects over the years to help carry out conservation work across the state. When I look back to when the nutrient strategy was first put into place, things started out there in a handful of priority watersheds across the state to serve as local hubs to share the outreach of what practices were available, what impact they can have, and really be demonstration projects. Fast forward to where we are today, those projects have grown into full-on implementation projects where they are working to increase the pace and scale of conservation practice adoption across the state. So we've really come a long ways from where we started at early days of the nutrient strategy with demonstration to now building upon partnerships, looking where we can build capacity, and really looking at how quickly we can help ramp up the scale of practice adoption across the state. A couple of those projects, of note that have really tackled that head on as far as, looking at novel ways they can build that capacity and to help scale up adoption. Some of that are kind of generally referred to as batch and build projects. The Ag Drainage Management Coalition is a great example of one where they partnered with several folks and organizations to focus on bioreactors and saturated buffers to find ways that they could help facilitate the processes needed for engineering, design, construction, put together numerous projects into large packages, and then help better facilitate that process and get those built much more quickly than doing a one-by-one approach, which has kind of been the tried and true method of the past. We're building beyond that now and finding ways that we can find economies of scale to help apply those principles towards conservation practice implementation in the state.
Of course, we know that in order to make Iowa's progress truly sustainable, we need to not only continue making water quality progress, but we also need to be growing more corn and soybeans, and we need to be doing it in a way that keeps farm families in business. So how do you see the state of Iowa balancing those three sustainability needs?
Yeah, and that's certainly a great point. Those are big needs that we have to make sure we're addressing going forward. I think, with the close-knit relationships we've helped to cultivate in this state between farmers and the organizations that work on their behalf and the researchers, those are important relationships to have. Having that circle of innovation, implementation, and continuous improvement are the types of things that are going to keep accelerating us down the path towards these sustainability needs. And in that process, keeping in mind that we are always seeking ways to maintain or enhance our productivity while also meeting the water quality goals we have with our state in terms of helping reduce our nitrogen and phosphorus losses. Producers play a really instrumental part in that process, making sure that they can help reality check some of the research, making sure those are things that actually are implementable, are feasible, work well in their fields. And not just having research that comes out that's uninformed by the practical situations and the real-life landscapes that occur across our state. So having that close-knit community, those close connections, is really going to be something I see as being incredibly important going forward to help us maintain those goals.
So what's coming up next? What's the next step? Where are farmers in the entire state of Iowa going to be focusing as we look to make progress in the months and years to come?
A lot of that focus is going to continue to be on places where we have work yet to do, particularly with nitrogen. That has been so much of the increased focus over the past, half dozen years alone. That comes off the heels of where we've made great progress, where we've focused in the past. If we look at all the things that we've done across the state, thanks to farmers to help reduce erosion, we've made great progress, where that focus was really hyper-focused on helping meet those needs. That's actually translated into a sizable amount of progress towards our phosphorus reduction goals under the nutrient strategy. We've achieved a 27% reduction in our phosphorus losses over time thanks to the focus we've had. That's out of a 29% goal that agriculture has in Iowa, so we've made a lot of progress there. That's going to continue, obviously, because controlling erosion and keeping our soil in place is a very important concern. But as we've learned from where we focused in the past, where we have applied our time and our resources and attention, we've had great success. And so with nitrogen certainly being one of those things that has had a lot more attention and focus in recent years, that's going to be where I see us focusing more going forward, and certainly where I expect to see a lot of progress continue to be made.
Farmers should take a lot of pride in Iowa's conservation and water quality progress, and we're coming up on a really timely opportunity to share all about it. Next week is National Agriculture Week, and Tuesday, March 21st, is National Agriculture Day. National Ag Week is a great chance for you to shine a light on the progress that's being made. And if you need some help to tell that story, check out conservationcountsiowa.com. That website is packed with stories and stats that clearly illustrate the commitment farmers are making to conservation. That's it for this episode of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. We hope you found it useful and that you'll join us for the next one on March 27th. Thank you for doing the work that inspires everything we do here at the Iowa Farm Bureau, and thanks for listening to the Spokesman Speaks.
Thank you for listening to the Spokesman Speaks, a podcast by Iowa Farm Bureau. Check out more podcast episodes at iowafarmbureau.com/podcast. You can also find and subscribe to the Spokesman Speaks podcast in the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and other popular podcast apps. We appreciate your ratings and reviews, and we welcome you to email us your feedback at podcast@ifbf.org.